Hey, thanks for coming back. So we're kicking off series 2, and our main focus will be on the parables and how they can help us understand the last days prophecies and the coming of the Lord, the end of the world, quote unquote. We covered at least 9 pieces of evidence in series 1, scriptural evidence that puts this story in context of the generation that Jesus was speaking to. We read Matthew chapter 24, Luke chapter 21. There's specific verses. Matthew 24 was verse 34. Luke 21 is verse 22, verse 32. We read from John 21 about how John would be alive at his coming in verse 23 to the end of the chapter. Acts chapter 2, 16 through 40. Peter puts the church there in context of being in the last days, as was prophesied by Joel. We read from Revelations 1 through 7, about how those that pierced Christ would see him returning on the clouds, how that the Father would tell the Son to tell his angel that the time was come. And in Revelations 21, how John was not to seal the prophecies of that book. And we read several other things. But all of those things are evidence, and you can choose to ignore it, or you can choose to consider it as we read the story that's in the Bible. I want to start with today in this new series with a little psychology experiment that was done in the 60s by a Dr. Seligman. He conducted an experiment with dogs that had a box, and there was a divider in the middle of the box. On one side of the box there was an electrocution chamber. On the other side it was just a safe area. So he put the first group of dogs in there, and when they turned the electrocution area on, the dogs hopped over the little divider and found a safe haven, and then they would turn it off and the dogs would go back and forth. But every time they turned it on, the dogs would jump over to the safe spot. The second group of dogs, they had the same chamber, and they leashed the dogs. This is not humane. They won't let them do this anymore. I don't think it was a good idea. I love dogs. But they leashed the dogs to where they could not get out of the electrocution chamber. It wasn't enough electrocution to kill the dogs. It just created a lot of discomfort. So the second group of dogs had not participated yet. They're in there with a leash. They turn the electricity on, and the dogs, try to move or escape. They can't get anywhere. And eventually they lie down and whimper. And then they turn the electricity off. The dog might walk around for a while. They turn it back on. The dog eventually lays down and whimpers. Turn it off, turn it back on, conduct it over and over. And eventually that dog just lays down every time the electricity is on. So that's phase 2. Phase 3, they take dogs from the first group and dogs from the second group and put them in there together. The electricity's turned on, and the dog that was in the first group jumps over to a safe place. But the dog that was in the second group, he is now not leashed. He lays down and whimpers. They turn the electricity off, put the dogs back in the electrocution chamber, turn the electricity back on. The first dog from group 1 jumps over to the safe area. This second dog from group 2 lays down and continues to whimper, even though he can get over just like the other dog. They called this, the result of this experiment was something that they called learned helplessness. So this dog had learned, the dogs from group 2 had learned to feel helpless. And even though they could get out of the situation they were in, they wouldn't do it on their own. And the experimenters, they did start to pick up the dog when the electricity was on to show them that they could get over the divide. And after picking them up a few times, finally the dog figured out that it could get to a safe place. So it's a very well-known experiment, learned helplessness. It's something that psychologists know exists with humans, and there's a reason why I'm bringing it up. So I think the parables can help us a little bit understand, number one, context, and number two, it might help some of our anxieties when it comes to the subject of the end of the world or the end of days. So we'll talk about that as we go through this series, and I might refer back to that experiment, but that's what I'm talking about. For this first lesson, I'd like to look at Matthew chapter 24. Again, we looked at it last time. This is going to be quick and probably easy. Matthew 24 in verse 37. If you just read verse 37, 38, 39, Jesus is talking about the signs of the end of the times, the return of the Son of Man, how that's going to be in that generation. And he refers to it in Matthew 24, 27 as if it were the days of Noah. And this is something very common. I've heard this a lot in my life. But as in the days of Noah, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. And he talks about how they were drinking and, eat, drink, and be merry. They were living life without a care in the world while Noah's building this ark. They would mock Noah. It had never rained, and Noah's building this ark. Noah's preaching to them, repent or perish. Nobody believes Noah. It's Noah and his family. And here they are. They didn't figure it out until it started to rain. And then when the flood started coming, everybody ran toward the ark, but God had already closed that door. So why are we talking about this? Jesus gives this example referring to the return of the Son of Man, what all these signs are pointing to. And there's a couple of reasons why I want to look at it. One thing is, today in America, we have a ark encounter in Kentucky where they've built a replica ark. And it's pretty cool, I would think. I haven't seen it, but I would go see it if I was in the area. It's supposed to be life-size, according to the dimensions that were given to Noah. But the thing about the story of Noah is we know that it's already happened. And we know that it's not going to happen again. We know that the rainbow is a sign that God's not going to destroy the earth with a flood. It would be silly if that ark encounter was built for a commune and they fenced it in and the public wasn't allowed there, but families were there that could raise children and teach their children that this ark that they have on their property is there for when the flood arrives. It would be silly because we know that that's not going to happen. If you did raise children and generations of children in a commune like that, with an ark like that, It took Noah 120 years. It might be 120 years of generational people living in this commune. If they lived there today and they were hearing their whole life from infancy till old age, the story would be passed down, and you could actually teach helplessness to children and families. What do I mean by that? Well, every time a big storm comes, those children or young adults or middle-aged people, they might be overcome with fear and run to the ark. Every time a flash flood warning is given, they might think it's time to get all the animals in the ark. Now we know that's silly, and that's not what the Ark Encounter is about. I get it. They're not claiming it to be some device to save people from some future flood. But if that was happening, that could create learned helplessness with people in a commune that are teaching that. Jesus talks about this as being the return of Christ. And the context we're given is in the generation that he's speaking to. And that's where I think the parables will help us. Hopefully, I've described this as a tapestry that I believe is a completed work that we need to marvel at and just appreciate the detail of the work, because no matter what part of the painting you're looking at, if it's the work of redemption, there's great detail there. If we're looking at the end time story, we can also see great detail in how exact prophecies were fulfilled from the prophets in the Old Testament and the predictions of Christ and the prophets in the New Testament. I guess what I'm saying is this Bible holds a very sacred story. And if we can look at it and see the completed work in it, we can truly enjoy a relationship with God because of everything that he accomplished in this Bible. And I think that's his desire for us in his eternal kingdom from Daniel chapter 3. So let's look at parables together. I know that that's not well accepted, and I don't think my parents raised me in a commune. I was raised around a lot of loving people. But I know that some harm was done. There's harm to people that I know. There's harm to me personally. There's harm to relatives that I know. There's helplessness. And what I mean by that is every time there's a new moon or a supermoon or a red calf born in Israel, or every time Israel has conflict, or every time there's a great earthquake, or every time there's a Y2K event, or war in the Middle East, the Iraqi wars, or the pandemic, there are people that they're taking it for a sign that some of these horrible things like the tribulation are like right upon us. And that can be learned helplessness. So I'd like to look at the evidence. It's not just some idea. I'm trying to look at evidence. What does the Bible say? What context are we given? And how can we look at it as a marvelous piece of work, just like we look at the flood with Noah? I mean, I'm not afraid when it rains that we're going to all die, the whole world's going to die, because I know the story. So I'm trying to help us understand the story. And hopefully that's where this will lead us. I appreciate your time. I look forward to looking at the parables with you. Thank you.